Hello, I'm Sinta Ebersohn. I am the founder of Get Up and Grow, and this week we are celebrating Men's Health Week, International Men's Health Week to be exact. And part of the process of honoring this week, I'm doing interviews with some special men who've agreed to share their personal stories with us, their journeys with adversities and challenges, and even trauma where it's relevant, what they did to face those challenges or adversities and how they overcame them. With me today is Simon Hill. Simon, thank you so much for agreeing to have this conversation and welcome.
Thank you, Sinta. It's a pleasure to be here.
Will you please just start by telling your story with us, share whatever you're comfortable with, and just let us in.
Okay, sure. I'll begin my story roughly, I think it was about 10, possibly 12 years ago. I just relocated in Cape Town from Gauteng, where I'd spent roughly 10 years building up a business. It was hugely stressful. And at one point, I had to face up to an insolvency and managed to pick myself up from there and then get the business going again, paid off all my creditors, et cetera, and the business went on to be pretty successful. But I would say that 10 years took its toll on me. You know, I developed some serious digestive problems and, you know, I had the beginnings of a peptic ulcer, et cetera, from all the stress. Anyhow, so at the end of that 10-year period, my eldest son had just been born, and we decided it was a good idea to relocate to Cape Town. And we relocated in Noordhoek, which is a wonderful place to be. And I started a whole new chapter of my life. In fact, it was a whole new book. It was like I started a new life again. I grew up in Cape Town. I was always near the beach. I grew up surfing. It was a major part of my life. And I had to say goodbye to that for 10 years. So relocating in Noordhoek was, yeah, it was like coming home for me. You're surrounded by beach and mountains. And yeah, but it was also sort of a bit of a watershed for me because not long after relocating in Cape Town, I exited the business that I'd worked my ass off, you know, for 10 years to build up. I decided I had to get out of it. It wasn't doing my health any good, causing huge amounts of stress. So I resigned my shares and basically walked away from it. And then I had to go through a process of reinventing myself. And I had a lot of time on my hands. So I spent probably about a year, possibly 2 years, just surfing and doing yoga. I mean, thankfully, I had the time and the space and the wherewithal to do it. And I went through quite a transformational process. First of all, the physical practice of yoga is a really good way to deal with stress and trauma because it's like it's a physical release, if you like, of something that's embedded in your tissues. And thankfully, I had a really good yoga teacher who was very aware of the esoteric side of yoga. And it was a great introduction as well, because I started to explore the philosophical side of yoga. And from there, I developed a meditation practice, which also helped me enormously. So that's where I would say my sort of awakening began. And when I say awakening, I mean, you know, I was a person that was so driven, and for me, it was all about manifesting in the physical world. I was able to do that. Built up a pretty successful business. My marriage was doing very well at that stage. And the next part of the manifestation process for me was building a brand new home, which was quite an experience. I have some experience in the building industry. I actually was a quantity surveyor for the first part of my working career, so it wasn't a big stretch for me to do it. You know, as far as the technical side went, but it was very stressful managing the whole process, mainly because of the unreliability of tradespeople and so forth. So that was a very interesting experience. And my marriage barely survived it because, you know, there's a massive amount of financial pressure as well when you're building a home. Budgets run away with you, etc. So that was quite an experience. We eventually moved into the home. It was beautiful. It was everything that I'd ever wanted. And then from that point onwards, you know, began a whole new journey for me. I sort of had to reinvent myself. I'd exited a business that I'd been involved with for about 18 years. And now was a time that I had to go through a process of totally overhauling myself and reinventing myself. And for a while, I became a yoga teacher. I ran the local yoga studio. I took it over from my teacher. And that was a wonderful transition because, you know, one needs purpose. You need something to get up for in the morning. And
Yes.
after having exited a business that I was involved in for 18 years, I needed some new sort of focus in my life. And so it was a brilliant transition. And I learned a lot. And somewhere during that process, I also started to explore plant medicines, which I have to say is not for everybody, but I felt a calling to do it. And in particular, I will mention ayahuasca, which was, which it was hugely transformative for me. But I went into the experience knowing that I needed to go through some kind of a internal transformation process. So I wasn't going there just as a sort of a psychedelic explorer or as someone that was, you know, just mildly curious about the experience and wanted to sort of add it to their, you know, tick it off on their bucket list. It wasn't that at all. It was something that I felt that I really needed to do because, yeah, I wanted to be a better father and, you know, try and be a better husband and ultimately be a better person. You know, I was aware of the fact that I had a lot of stuff that I needed to work through. And I found that it helped me tremendously. I was able to heal my relationship with my parents. And it did definitely make me more mindful as a father. And I think it helped my marriage a lot, although my marriage, you know, ultimately didn't survive, mainly because myself and my wife at the time went through huge changes on an individual level. And we got to the point where we found that for us to grow, you know, we needed to be apart from one another. So that was the next big thing to happen in my life, was to go through this process of divorce. And it was, I found it very, very difficult, I have to say, you know, letting go. I think we both knew that we had to let go, but it wasn't easy. And during the separation process, you know, my ex-wife moved on with somebody else without actually telling me. And I found out through one of my children, which is very, very difficult for me. So I felt an enormous sense of betrayal. And that was something I had to dig really deep to work through, because I think the first inclination is always to, well, not always, but for me anyway, it was to blame, to point fingers, and to set myself up as being the victim. Mm-hmm. And but luckily, before I fell too far into this state of victimhood, I was able to pull myself back. I gave myself a good talking to, and I realized that, you know, you're only a victim if you decide that you are, and that, you know, ultimately there's no one to blame. So I had to do some serious soul searching, and I had to look at some very uncomfortable facts. You know, I'd not always been a very good husband, and I had to acknowledge that. And at times I hadn't been a very good father. I had to acknowledge that too. So the whole process that had been initiated by doing, you know, plant medicines now continued, but I did it without taking any kind of substances. this was something that I had to deal with on my own, with my own resources, and I had to dig deep and use what I'd learned, with those plant medicine experiences. And of course, the most important thing that I've learned is that there's no one to blame. There's never anyone to blame, because all of our experiences are co-creation. And but I also found that it's all very well to talk about that, but you actually have to feel it for it to mean anything. It has to be authentic, in other words. And so I spent a lot of time on my own in contemplation, in meditation. I had some pretty good support with friends as well. And through the process, I made new friends. But it was that the divorce ended up being another hugely transformative experience for me. And during the course of this whole, separation, divorce, the negotiations around the divorce, the division of the assets and that sort of thing, I lost a huge amount of weight and became quite physically fragile. So I had to go through the whole process of rebuilding myself on the physical level. But I also realized that could only really happen, when I'd healed on the psychological and spiritual level. It all had to work hand in hand. And I went through that whole process and came out of it on the other side, I think, a lot wiser, a lot stronger. And also, I think, I was humbled a lot through that process, always having been this A-type guy, this go-getter. I believed that I could do anything. But, being I'm a Taurus, so I'm like a typical bull. I don't go around things. I don't go under things. I don't try and avoid things. I tend to smash straight through them, which is not the wisest strategy. You can only get away with that for so long. I mean, you're going to damage yourself and you're going to damage other people. So I've had to, I would say, modify my my makeup, my let's call it my genetic makeup, if you like. I've had to look at it and to work very, very, very hard at modifying that. And so now my approach is way more gentle. I've tried to become more gentle, as opposed to this typical bull in a china shop that just tends to want to smash through everything. But you do get results. But the collateral damage is not worth it. So that's been my lesson, that we all come into this life with certain lessons to learn. We often come with a lot of baggage because, I think we were all traumatized to a certain degree, through childhood, mainly because of the way that society is set up. And our parents very often were not conscious or aware enough to understand the impact that their behavior was having on us. And so I think a lot of us were traumatized by system, if you like. I even found that the education system was very difficult for me to fit into. I think I was always a pretty bright kid. I grasped things pretty quickly. But my main problem with school was that none of the learning was ever properly contextualized. So there was no bigger picture. We couldn't see how everything fitted together, and we weren't encouraged to ask questions either, for the most part. Of course, you did have those amazing teachers, and then we can all remember them, who stood out for us, teachers that took a proper interest in us and encouraged us to ask questions and sort of went beyond the school curriculum in an effort to give us a broader education. So I did have a couple of teachers like that, and they made a tremendous difference. But generally speaking, I think a lot of us were also traumatized by the education system.
Yes. Mm.
So, that's your field of expertise. You understand all about trauma and how it actually gets imprinted on our physical being. My experience is that the way that I often experienced it was in the gut area. You would feel it sort of rising, if you like, from there. And it sort of comes up into your chest area, and sometimes it even constricts your chest so that you can't breathe properly. So it starts with the butterflies in the stomach, the nervousness moves up to the chest area, constricts the chest. So I had a lot of experience with like the physical manifestations of trauma. And but fortunately we do have modalities that are available to us nowadays that we can consciously work through these traumas. And then, the best part about that is I think it puts us in a position then we can help others. But of course we can only do it if we've dealt with our own trauma.
Yes.
It's probably a lifetime thing. It's a journey. You don't arrive at any particular destination, and I don't think anyone can say, oh, I've dealt with all my trauma, I have no more baggage. I don't think it works that way. I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, I agree with you. I think it's definitely a lifelong journey. And then there's still some that we have to do, I think, that we still haven't done. But Simon, thank you very much for being so open about sharing your experiences and your perceptions on your own situation. And I want to also commend you for the work that you've done and the effort that you've put in to making yourself a better father and a better husband, like you mentioned. It's not easy for us to take a long, hard look in the mirror and find the things that we need to work on ourselves. The easy way is to blame others. And you said it so well that there's nobody to blame. We co-create our situations. So thank you. Thank you for bringing that to light. It's a good, very valuable reminder. I'm curious to know, how does it feel? What is it that culminates to the point where you, and this is applicable to all of us, what brought you to the point where you felt, I have to do something, I have to take action, or I need to change? Because we all have our lives that we live, and we have situations. And I remember now that you mentioned your business, your relationship, your home, there were a lot of things that you felt you needed to change or wanted to change. Is there something specific that led you to the point where you could take that first step or change direction? What is it that makes that happen? I'm always interested to know, what is it that give people the inspiration or the strength or the courage to take that first step to make a change?
Well, the way it worked for me was I always had a really a bad temper. Again, like a typical Taurian. We often sort of like build up pressure, internal pressure, if you like, and then we tend to explode. So there's no sort of safety valve mechanism, if you like, where you can sort of like release the pressure. For me, it was like I'd often just would explode, and then I saw the damage that it was doing to my children, because at times they witnessed these explosions, and I saw what an effect that it had on them. And I realized that if I didn't break the cycle of trauma, or at least attempt to break the cycle of trauma, I was going to be inflicting more trauma on my children. And I think there's a passage in the Old Testament that says the sins of the father shall be visited upon the sons, even until the 7th generation. And I think that's what it's referring to. It's referring to epigenetic trauma. So at some point, this internal voice, started speaking to me and saying, you need to change this. If you don't change this, you're sentencing your children to the same trauma that you went through, and it's going to be perpetuated. And then that radiates out into the world, and then we're just creating more trauma in the world. So it's like our own personal situations, our own personal domestic situations reverberate outwards into what I would call the field of information, which connects all living beings on this planet. And so I think it was the philosophy behind yoga that really got me thinking along those lines. We don't operate in a vacuum. In other words, everything that we do, everything that we choose to say, our actions have an immediate effect in our immediate surroundings, but then it reverberates outwards into the world.
Yeah.
So in other words, if we can do our best to raise, well-adjusted children, they're going to go out into the world and they're going to make a difference. So it begins, first of all, on the personal level with you, and then your immediate family, your circle of friends, your community, and then it reverberates outwards. So that was what sparked me to want to go through these changes, because I saw what it was doing to my children.
Yes. And it's interesting, as I'm listening to you, what comes up for me is the generational stuff that we all have to deal with. We've all heard of generational and intergenerational trauma that we're all carrying. And then you said we have to raise better children. I always feel that I have to raise myself also. And I have 2 children myself. And I've often said that although my own childhood with my parents was quite troubled, because we received the programming that our parents had, that they received from their parents. So it's programming that goes back generations, and we just keep on carrying them. Yeah. But when in raising my own children, I've often said that I actually had the best childhood while I was raising my own children, which was actually an amazing experience for me, a growth experience, and raising myself in the process. But I need to say, well done for facing that, because it's not easy when we see the impact of our actions on other people. I've experienced it myself. Something would come out of my mouth and I can literally see the other person cringe from what I said or what I did, or sometimes did not do or did not say. And it's hard to face that then and be honest and open with yourself and say, that was me. That is something I need to look at. That is something I need to work on. So well done for doing that. It's not easy to do that. It takes courage to do that.
But as you just put that very well, you just articulated that extremely well, because it's true. When you see your rage and your anger being reflected back at you in the eyes of someone that you love, and you see them visibly cringing and shrinking, before your eyes, it's, oh my God, it's an awful experience. And then, you know that you have to do something about it. You have to, because you don't really have it. I thought that I didn't have a choice. And now I'm in the business of helping people to heal. So, I've sort of come full circle with it. And I'm witnessing a lot of stress and pain and fear and depression, anxiety.
Yes.
It seems to be endemic.
Those are the illnesses of our time.
Yeah, it seems that we've reached some sort of watershed moment in our so-called Western civilization. Although I'm not sure how civilized it actually is, that seems to be a little bit of a misnomer. I don't think we are all that civilized, really. But that's just a personal observation, and I'm seeing a lot of suffering happening on a collective level, and I work with it almost every single day now. And I do feel that my own personal experiences have given me some insights into it. But what I always try and do is encourage people to take charge of their own lives, to take full responsibility, to take full ownership I refer to it as sovereignty. In other words, you become the king or queen of your own personal domain. You become the benevolent ruler of your own domain.
Yes, yes. I love that. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you. But we always tend to want to hand our power over. Even when it comes to our own personal health and well-being, we somehow think that if we pay enough money, or if we go and see the right doctor, the right physician, the right psychiatrist, the right psychologist, somehow we think that they're going to have the answers for us. And sadly, they don't, because those professions are not set up to do that anymore. This is my own personal opinion, my own personal observations. In other words, there's very little emphasis anymore on actual healing. It's rather the emphasis is on masking the symptoms of the trauma, masking the symptoms of the disease, rather than tackling the underlying cause, which, to me is a form of insanity. Just trying to sort of block physical symptoms, or trying to shut off psychological symptoms without getting to the underlying cause, or the underlying disease, or the underlying trauma. It's a totally futile exercise, and the more you delay it, the more you prolong it.
That's true, and we literally just suppressing things and putting plasters on.
Yes.
On the wounds. Yeah,
yes, it reminds me of that story, of the dike, and the dike is cracking, and someone putting the hole in the finger,
yes.
finger in the hole of the crack, and expecting that to hold back all this ton of water that's behind the dike.
Yeah, it's only a matter of time.
Yeah, it's a crazy idea that you can do that, but unfortunately, this is this is the way that, again, our modern civilization seems to work. Quick fix. We're always looking for the quick fix. We want to take a pill. We want to get a result, and unfortunately, it doesn't really work that way. So, I'm, my work I see as trying to encourage people to take control of their lives. Maybe control is not the right word, but to understand that it's a fully participatory process. And you have to do your part. You have to participate. And you cannot hand over your power to anybody else and expect to get a result.
No, you have to take charge.
You got to take charge. Yes. And in doing so, I believe that means doing due diligence. In other words, whatever situation you're dealing with, try and inform yourself as best you can about that particular. Let's say, for instance, even if you're employing a lawyer, and you're handing over a case to him, and you want him to get a good result, you need to actually go into that area of the law yourself and do some research. And so that you can have an intelligent conversation with him around the matter. And of course, all the information is available to you. You just got to take the trouble to look for it. Yes. Again, that's something that I've got personal experience with. And that lawyer, typically, if he knows that you understand that area of the law, and that you're basically looking over his shoulder, making sure that he's doing things correctly, you're going to get a way better result, and you're going to spend a lot less money. Well, that was my experience anyway, on several occasions with having to use a lawyer. And I think the same thing applies to your spiritual well-being. You can't go to a guru or a rabbi or a priest or a minister, hand over your spiritual woes to them and expect them to get a result for you. Not at all. Not at all. It's never going to happen.
There's always an element of something we have to do ourselves.
Yes.
But before we get more into that, I want to ask you a question which I'm sure you've been asked many times. Do you ever miss the business world and that lifestyle that you left, that you exited from?
No, not at all, because I've created a new business, a new lifestyle. I run a medical cannabis dispensary. I interact on a daily basis with clients and customers. I don't want to call them patients because, that would be, indirectly comparing myself to a doctor, because that's not what I do at all. But I do have a lot of medical knowledge. I spent the last 8 or 10 years reading peer-reviewed science, especially around my particular field, which is cannabis, CBD. I've had to educate myself on human physiology and psychology. Again, there's lots of really good source material out there. You just have to get going with it, and you just have to make a start. Doesn't matter what area you're researching, make a start. Just start looking, and it's amazing how you'll be led in the right direction if your intent is pure.
Yes.
If your intentions are good, you'll get led in the right direction. There seems to be some force at work, some universal force at work that will guide you and lead you, because what you're looking for ultimately is your purpose, your soul's purpose. And I really do strongly believe that we are spiritual beings, essentially, having a physical experience in this three-dimensional reality, and we have souls, and those souls are immortal. And if we can connect with that soul and listen to that internal wisdom, that internal voice, we will get guided in the right direction. So I feel that what I'm doing now is in line with my true purpose, which I only found after the age of 50. But thank God I found it. Because you see a lot of people that are basically waiting to retire, and when they retire, say on a golf estate somewhere, they sit around waiting to die almost.
True,
because they suddenly don't have a purpose anymore. And a very wise woman once said to me, Simon, you need to find your soul's purpose by the time before you hit 60, because if you don't, she said, I witnessed it all around me. She lives in Somerset West, and that's sort of like golf estate, territory. There's golf estates everywhere where people go to retire. She says she sees so many people just sitting around waiting,
lost
to die, waiting to die. They don't have a purpose anymore. So I just thank God that I did find a purpose, and although my modality is working with CBD and cannabis and other plant medicines, it could have been any kind of modality really, but something that I find that I'm in alignment with. I'm in alignment with my soul's purpose, and that gives me something to get up for, in the morning.
Yeah, and we all owe it to ourselves to discover that. We all owe it to ourselves to uncover and discover what it is that works for us, that resonates with us, and that, like you said, we're in alignment with. Simon, if you had one chance to go and speak to your former self of 15 years ago, what would you say?
That's a really good question. That's a very, very good question. So if I go back 15 years, let me work out where I was then.
Well, 10, 15 years, somewhere there.
Yeah. That was sort of, that was the beginning of the period of my life when I went through this tumultuous change. So I would say to myself, you're going to go on a real roller coaster ride now, Simon. So buckle up. And not going to be easy. It's going to be hugely challenging, but just go with it. Just trust, accept that you're going to have to go through this process, and just know that when you come out on the other side, you're going to know more about yourself. You're going to be wiser. You're going to change significantly. You're not going to be the same person that you were, but you're going to develop some real purpose, and you're going to develop some humility. And you're also going to feel a stronger connection with your soul and with spirit. And you're going to come to understand that that's really what life is all about. That's your life's purpose, is to connect with your soul and to allow that soul to connect with spirit. Because we're not here on this earth for long, we're mortal. And I think, up to a certain age, we're sort of in denial about our mortality. We live our lives like we're going to live forever, but we're not. You
And
know,
it's also appropriate that we do that at some stage in our lives, I think.
yes,
But
it is appropriate. It is
yeah.
appropriate,
Mm.
which leads me back to the way that our society is structured. You know, there was a certain time where we lived more as small communities, and young people always went through some kind of a ritual, some kind of
Yes.
a coming of age ritual.
Mm.
And that's hugely important. You know, there's this, there were always these very important rituals where you went from being a child and a teenager, and now you're coming into the adult world. In other words, now you have fully functioning sexual reproductive organs. You know, there's all these physical changes that come over you, and
Yes.
you know, you're no longer a child anymore, but you're also not a fully fledged adult. So there needs, I believe there needs to be some process that helps you to get through that transitional stage. And it was all set up in a way that it was going to be a huge challenge. And you had to overcome some type of adversity.
Mm.
But once you got to the other side of that process, you were accepted then into the world of the adults in your particular tribe or society or village or whatever. And we lack that. We don't have that anymore.
Yeah.
So there's some very important milestones in our lives that are not properly acknowledged and worked through in the form of some sort of ceremony or ritual.
Yes.
And
I'm
I
so
feel
glad
that
you
that's
brought that
lacking.
up, because
Yeah.
it's so important for individuals to go through that transition, and also for the community or the society to acknowledge that and honor them for having
Yes.
gone through that growth process. I personally love rituals and celebrations, and I agree with you. There's a lack of that.
Yes.
We need to make a concerted effort to create things like that.
Yeah, look, I think a huge part of the reason why we seem to have lost our way, look, again, you might not agree with me on that score, but I think what we're seeing in the world at large is a reflection of our collective deep subconscious. You know, it's being reflected back at us now from what's going on around the world. And we can see there's massive changes happening. The whole geopolitical landscape is changing visibly day by day.
Yes.
Before our very eyes. So we're living in the midst of huge change. It's extremely unsettling. So, you know, and we lack the framework and the structure, if you like, where we can integrate and assimilate all this into our lives. We don't have it anymore. We don't feel properly supported. And I think possibly it's because our whole idea about community has changed. You know, we kind of, and I've had this experience, we live behind these huge walls in suburbia, you know, with our electric fences and razor wire and alarm systems and everything. And so we've sort of we've become separated.
Isolated.
From our community, from ourselves, and more importantly still from nature.
Very true, very true.
Because we are nature. Nature is us and we are nature, but somehow we've come to believe that we're not. We're separate from nature, and somehow we have this dominion over nature, and we can help ourselves to whatever we want in the way of resources. But what we don't understand is that we're very much injuring and in the process of even killing our own mother, because this earth, this beautiful planet, which is this beautiful blue sphere floating in the inky blackness of space, and it stands out among all the other planets because it's blue. And you can see just by looking at it that it supports life.
It's life.
Okay, so, you know, from that perspective, you know, this is a very unique planet, and it's beautiful and it's abundant. And if you want to think of the earth as being our mother, she gives unconditionally. But now she's hugely stressed. She's being used and abused. And I think the underlying cause is that somehow we've come to believe that we are not part of nature. We're separate. And if we carry on down that road, I think we may be doomed as a species. I don't think we're going to.
There's a lot of truth in your words, saying we think we're not part of it, we've removed ourselves to such a degree that we, in some instances, literally aren't a part of it. And that's very sad, because Mother Nature miraculously perseveres through all the ages of mankind and all the stupid things that we do. But talking about nature, will you share with us how your relationships, you mentioned earlier that you realized you wanted to be a better parent and a better husband. How did the changes and the growth that you go through impact your relationships with your children and with others?
Okay, I think I've developed more of a capacity to listen.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a skill that's definitely worth cultivating. And I've also developed the capacity to be way less confrontational.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think there's any harm with, having boundaries and saying, whoa, hang on a minute, you're crossing a boundary there. Just move back a little bit. I don't think there's anything wrong with it, having healthy boundaries, but we've got to be very careful how we apply those boundaries. So I would say that it's had a major impact on the way that I interact with my children. I see them now as being, as not being extensions of myself, which parents can tend to do. They see their children as being extensions of themselves, but they're not. We're their caretakers. They're these beautiful souls that have incarnated in physical form. They quite possibly chose us before they even incarnated to be their parents. And so we're more their caretakers, if you like, than their parents. So there is this tendency of ownership. My children, no, my son, my daughter. So I think I've moved away from that way of thinking, and I see them more as these like rare, beautiful souls that I've got the privilege of having guardianship over. And I think I'm better not listening to them, listening to what they have to say.
That's beautiful. That's beautiful, guardianship. Yeah, thank you for sharing.
Yeah, because especially when they get to a certain age, if you're still going through that outdated paradigm of parenting where you're trying to impose your will on your children, it's going to go horribly wrong. You'll lose them.
Yeah.
So it's not worth it. So and the other thing as well. As I said, my marriage didn't survive. We ended up going our separate ways. But I also came to understand that the way that you deal with your ex-partners, especially if you share children with them, it's critical, because your children are watching you all the time. They're listening to your telephone conversations. They're seeing how you interact. And they love both of you so much, and they want you to be able to get along and to communicate properly. And they want to see that there's still love between you. So I can honestly say with my hand in my heart, I still love my ex-wife. I don't regret not being married anymore, because again, that was another process that I went through that's helped me grow more. But I can honestly say now that she's a friend and an ally. So that's been a huge lesson for me. So it's changed the way I think about relationship in a profound way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that is profound. I couldn't have said it better myself. It's so important as parents when we separate,
sure,
to bear that in mind. You did mention something earlier about both of you realizing that you had to be apart if you were going to grow.
Yeah, I did.
Tell us more about that.
Okay, I think
it sounds like an amazing place to be if both parties in a relationship can actually agree that they need to part ways in order to grow.
Yeah, look, it's something that has to be managed very carefully.
Mm-hmm.
And the main reason is the fallout, for your children. I'm not saying, we got it right, from the beginning. We didn't. There were arguments. There were some dreadful rows. Our children did witness them. But I think, we both now got to a point where well, first of all, I mean, I've had to apologize to my children. I've had to go to them and say, I'm sorry, I behaved the way that I did. I behaved unconsciously. And I'm sorry that you had to witness that. I'm sorry that you had to be part of that. So I've had to show genuine remorse. I think, children, if they see that you're genuinely remorseful, they can forgive you. They can forgive you for anything. But you have to show that remorse. You have to be prepared to do that. So it means, leaving your pride at the door. It means, stepping away from this artificial construct, which is your ego. It means you've got to weaken its hold on you. That's a challenge we all face. If we're going to live purely from ego, our lives are going to be way less meaningful. And I believe as well, if we don't get it right in this life, you're going to come back and do it again. This is, again, my own personal beliefs, but I do believe in karma, and I do believe in reincarnation. I don't want to come back and have to do the same lessons again. So that's another thing that motivates me. But seeing the love in your children's eyes, the fact that they've forgiven you and they still love you is the biggest prize of all. So in other words, it's really worth working through these things, working through these situations, which, life presents these situations to you. You can't avoid them. And often you don't have a heck of a lot of choice in these, you can't, there's certain things that happen to you that you don't choose them, and you have no choice in the matter. You've got to face up to them. So the only kind of control, if you like, I don't like the word control, but the only kind of impact that you can have is by choosing how you react to these situations.
Yes.
And so I think it's a moment by moment choice. Maybe one of the biggest things that you can do for yourself is to cultivate what I always call a pause button. So there is a situation, there's potentially a reaction. You can feel this reaction because it always happens on a physical level. Like I said, it often comes from the gut area.
Yes.
And you feel it rising to your chest. And then if you could just somehow develop the faculty, the facility for just switching that pause button, and maybe walking away for a little bit, going out into the garden, walking around the tree a couple of times and taking some deep breaths, rather than just being reactive all the time. Because I mean, look, if we go through life being reactive to these situations, we actually slaves to our own out of control egos, right? So that's possibly one of the biggest lessons that we're here to learn. We're not our egos. That's not who we are.
Wise words. Pause button. I have a friend who calls it his brake. Like a handbrake. And yeah, those are very wise words. I think we all need to cultivate those. But then I also want to remind you, were mentioned earlier about being a Taurus and, rushing in or barging in. Sometimes there are situations where we need those people who are brave enough, or sometimes just stupid enough to barge in there, because sometimes we need somebody to go in and just tackle the thing head on, horns first,
but there's also that saying that what fools go where angels fear to tread. So you've got to be discerning. I think you're absolutely right. There are times where you've got to take action, and there's got to be bold, and it's got to be decisive. Absolutely. But you've got to develop the facility, the faculty to be able to discern, is this a situation where I should actually stand back and hit the pause button? Or is this a situation where I should just move decisively? And that's, if you do, whatever you do, you've got to try and do it with love and compassion.
Yes. Both. Yeah.
I suppose you could give someone a compassionate clap. I don't know.
Yes. Yeah, wouldn't that be wonderful? Something for us to practice. Simon, thank you so much for chatting with me and sharing your wisdom. And thank you for reminding us that if we see the journey ahead is tough, we can get into it and do it knowing that it's going to be tough, knowing that we're going to get to the other side and maybe find the joy in it as well.
Yeah, look, the word for that is courage.
Yes.
which comes from a, I think, medieval French word, courage,
Mhm.
which I think is it actually means heart.
Mhm.
Okay, I think that's what it means in medieval French. Courage means heart. So to have heart means to have courage.
Have heart, yes. Yeah.
And if it's coming from the heart, you know, if this is your internal guidance system, I think then everything will turn out okay.
True. Very true. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. And I'm sure
Pleasure.
everybody who's going to watch this video is going to find a lot of inspiration in this.
I hope so.
Thank you, Simon.